with a vengeance.
Now, I heard you mention Venezuela several times. So the average person here in the United States as well, the average person over 50, would say, well, Bernie Sanders would turn this country into Venezuela. Now you firsthand experience with Venezuela. Why don't you tell us how you became? In fact, you wrote a book, The Venezuelan Revolution: A Marxist Perspective. You can get it on Amazon.com. Why don't you tell us your experience with Venezuela, the Venezuelan Revolution, and Hugo Chavez?
Well, first of all, it was a revolution, you know. It was a genuine revolution. And by that, I mean a movement of millions of ordinary people. And Hugo Chavez, who I knew quite well, actually, I found him, he was a remarkable man. I know that he had a very bad press in the States. He was demonized by the CNN and the right-wing press in the States and so on and so on. He still is demonized. By the way, that should say to anyone with half an ounce of sense would ask themselves the question, you know, if the right-wing billionaire press attacks a man, what's the reason for it? And the reason certainly was that Hugo Chavez did whatever he could. He did his best to defend the interests of a mass of poor people in a country, brother, that ought to be a prosperous, wealthy country sitting on a sea of oil, you know, but was brutally exploited, particularly by the United States, by the oil companies and so on, for decades, for generations and so on. And this man was trying to make a change, trying to carry through a revolution. Now, the fact that revolution didn't turn out as many of us would have hoped, that's a separate question, which I'm quite willing to discuss the reason for that. But certainly he tried and introduced all kinds of reforms in health and education, remarkable reforms in health, education and other things, which represented a gigantic step forward. Now, I'm quite critical. I also know Nicolas Maduro, the president. I know him also quite well. But you see, I don't think that he doesn't step up to Chavez's knees, by the way. But in any case, and the present setup is as I say, it's chaotic, it's a mess. Which in my opinion is because they didn't go far enough, not because they went too far. They tried to combine capitalism and socialism. It doesn't work, by the way. That simply cannot work. That leads to chaos. But to come to the point, despite everything, and I'm quite critical of the present state of affairs, despite everything, you see, even now people get a false impression. For a start, by the way, the first thing I had that in the States, people said, look at their conscience and ask, what is the role of America in all this? From the word go, the American establishment, American imperialism, if you like to use that expression, they set out to destroy the Bolivian revolution. They set out to destroy it and undermine it by all the means at their disposal, and they have considerable means, of course. Decades and decades of sanctions, but they just stepped up in the middle of this coronavirus crisis. They stepped up the sanctions. They forced the few remaining American companies that are active in Venezuela to close down. This shows the hypocrisy when they talk about the poor people in Venezuela, the suffering. There is suffering, and there are poor people. How does that help the people of Venezuela? It does not. But if I might be allowed to just say a couple of words, you see, what they don't say, let's take this coronavirus. Now, perhaps even you don't know this, and I don't know. But certainly the average person in America wouldn't know. The treatment or the way in which the Venezuelan government has tackled this crisis has been a model. Even the opposition accept that. You know, even the opposition have said, well, say what you like about Maduro, but he's handled the crisis very well. For example, they surveyed immediately. 11 million people were surveyed to see whether they had any symptoms of coronavirus. If they showed the slightest symptoms, they were immediately visited by a doctor, by a specialist, and sent into quarantine and given treatment and so on. With the result, I don't know if you know this, I didn't know it until recently, Venezuela is the country in the whole of South America with the lowest number of victims of this virus, and deaths. I think there are about 10 deaths, astonishingly.
Really?
But yes, really. Even the opposition has confessed that the thing has been well handled. Now, you contrast this with your own country, with the state. Oh, Britain was an appalling record in relation to this crisis, you know.
You know, that's interesting. 10 deaths would be less than the number of U.S. indictments against the leadership of Venezuela during this crisis.
That's right. Yes, that's another point. The U.S. has been continually provoking Venezuela. Now, what they've done now is they've recently, I think they've introduced a reward of $10 million, I think, for anyone giving information leading to the arrest of Nicolas Maduro. For goodness sake, that's an act of war. they've also talked, prior to the crisis now set things back, but they were talking about sending the U.S. Navy to the Caribbean, allegedly because of drugs offenses. Now, look, even the American, the official drugs agency in the States knows perfectly well, and has stated many times, the direct route to the States is not through the Caribbean, it's through Colombia and Central America. So that was just another provocation. And the chap who's orchestrating all this is this horrible creature, Elliot Abrams, I think his name is, you know. He's the, if you didn't know, he's the special envoy for Venezuela. This man has got a very sinister past indeed, mixed up with all kinds of scandals of the Reagan era in Central America, you know, financing the Contras. He was involved in the Contra scandal, arming and training the El Salvador army. They were involved in a massacre in El Masote, I think, which got 200 persons killed. The whole thing was hushed up. Abrams was actively involved in all of that. And here is the man who's orchestrating this campaign against Venezuela. It really is a monstrous indictment, really.
And don't forget, too, you mentioned El Salvador, and we can't forget the murder of those nuns. Horrific, you know, and how people can try and justify that in their heads by demonizing people seeking social justice, economic justice.
Well, of course, I do not identify the people of the United States with their government, with the actions of the government. Neither did Chavez, by the way. Now, that's an interesting point. I've heard Chavez speak many times. Never at any time did he ever attack the American people as such. He would attack the American government, of course. Don't forget, there's a man that went to Harlem and met with the ordinary black people and so on, tried to help them and so on. But no, he always had a class point of view, not a nationalist point of view. That's the case, you know.
I have a quick question for you, because you mentioned the success of the attacking the virus there in Venezuela. How about Cuba? What's going on in Cuba? Because they have an excellent medical program down there.
Yeah, well, I haven't had the latest figures from Cuba. I could easily find out, but I do not believe that there's any problem in Cuba. First of all, it's an island with very limited links with the rest of the world, so you wouldn't expect that. Furthermore, easily controlled. And as you correctly say, they have an excellent health service. Now, there again, I mean, I have got many criticisms of the present Cuban regime. It's not socialism in any sense that I would understand. But nevertheless, what it does show is the advantages, the clear advantages of a system based on a nationalized health service, for example, which is built for the attention of health for the people, which surely ought to be the purpose of a health service anyway, and not the profits of a few companies, as is regrettably the case in the USA. I mean, I can't get my head around that yet. How a country like the USA could tolerate this state of affairs, it's beyond my comprehension.
Yeah, how we could have we spend more money on medical health care than any country on the planet, probably half the countries combined, and our healthcare system is a disaster. It's a nightmare to try and weave your way through this. Right. And all this money is getting siphoned away by these insurance companies.
That's the point.
Why is there an insurance company involved in medical care? Why do we need them for?
You tell me. It's a crime against the American people, actually. Yeah. Absolute crime.
Now, but back to Venezuela.
And it's clearly exposed now by the present coronavirus crisis.
Yeah, you'd think more people would wake up. Now, but back to Venezuela for a moment, because many people would say, well, Venezuela failed. And you pointed out initially, okay, sure, there was U.S. intervention and U.S. agitation, the power grid, taking down the power grid. But what about the food shortages? What was the cause of the food shortages?
Well, look, the position is, as I said earlier, I'm not a particular admirer of the present state of affairs in Venezuela, which I warned against. By the way, I discussed this with Chavez on many occasions. And I've gone public in Venezuela on many occasions. You see, if you're going to go for a socialist system, you must nationalize, you must take over what is known as the commanding heights of the economy. You can't mix and match part state ownership and part private ownership, which is what they've got in Venezuela. That includes agriculture, by the way. I mean, Venezuela ought to be able to produce plenty of food. Of course, the land reform was only partially carried out. And above all, of course, there is the most of the big food companies are in private hands, in the hands of the oligarchy still. They've not been taken over. And I believe that a large part of the food shortage is in fact produced by hoarding, deliberate hoarding, partly to get unfair profits, as also happens with the coronavirus scandal in many countries. But they've been doing this for years in Venezuela, and also deliberately to sabotage the government. I think it's part of the same setup, the same business.
Well, then, if I agree. Okay, I think there's definite manipulation with the food production, and I've seen articles.
Yes, that's been demonstrated many times.
Yeah, then why wouldn't they nationalize the food companies?
No, that is what they used to call the $64,000 question, isn't it? That's the point, that they didn't. That's the big mistake that Chavez made, and above all, the people around Chavez, I'm convinced, did not have the same intentions, the same ideas as the late president. And in fact, they didn't want to. They were afraid to go all the way, and all the time they were trying to conciliate the oligarchy, the rich people, and so on. Big mistake. Big mistake. I mean, I know there's some people, reformists and so on, they think you can have capitalism with a human face. You know, Ed, you cannot. You cannot. You try it. You try and negotiate a settlement with the enemy, with the other side. It's like trying to persuade a man-eating tiger to eat lettuce, to eat. I know some vegans might approve of that, but you just try it. You'll never convince the tiger, but you'll end up inside his belly. And I very much fear that's what's occurring in Venezuela, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I know at one point, it was gasoline was like 10 cents a gallon down in Venezuela, was it?
Yeah.
And what is it now? Do you know?
I don't know. I know that in recent days, actually, the inflation has taken off quite a lot because of the effects of the crisis, the sanctions, and so on, and also the falling price of oil. I mean, that damages the economy considerably in Venezuela. Obviously, oil has been very cheap, but I think the government has attempted to increase the price of oil. To some extent, that's justified because it was ridiculously low. And if you've ever been to Caracas, the traffic jams there are something else again.
Yeah, I could imagine. Now, let me ask you a question.
You can't actually.
I always advocate here in the United States for the nationalization of the oil industry, which is $200 billion a year. And I always say that, and I'm not an economist, but I'm a common sense kind of guy, that this would reduce the cost of oil. Gasoline would be so much cheaper, and this would reduce the cost of goods and services across the board. Lower gas prices should be a good thing. And people right now, gas prices are very low here in the United States just because of the markets.
Yeah.
And Trump is saying, no, we need to increase the price of oil. Now, why would that be good for the average person to pay more for gasoline?
Well, you are assuming that Trump represents the interest of the average person. Right. I think he represents the interest of the average billionaire like himself.
I agree with you, but the average person here who supports Trump is enjoying low gas prices. And when they hear their president saying, I want to raise the price of your gasoline, why don't they wake up? Why don't they see that doesn't benefit themselves?
As far as I think you find that many of them will be waking up gradually. It's true. I was recently told, I don't know if it's true, you can confirm or deny, but I think that the president's ratings are now beginning to fall, aren't they?
Well, who knows? Because the opposition, Mr. Biden, is such a loser of a candidate that he's not going to win. This guy doesn't have a chance.
Well, you're right. I mean, for goodness sake. I mean, if he wanted to put up deliberately a candidate that was going to lose the election, who better than Joe Biden, for God's sake?
I can't think of one. Okay. Maybe Joe Biden. Maybe his son. Maybe his son who was there getting shooting crack addicts.
Yeah. I've seen more life on a fishmonger's slab. Oh dear.
Mr. Woods, I have to play a commercial break, okay? And I forgot to tell you off the air, the commercial break is oh my goodness, it's 4 minutes long, so you have plenty of time to take a little.
Oh, that's real good.
I'm sorry, 4 minutes long. We'll be back with more of Alan Woods, who is an expert on Marxism, socialism, communism. We're talking today about the Venezuelan Revolution, a Marxist perspective. You can